At precisely 7:42 on the morning of the 1st of February 2026, a statement attributed to Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, began to circulate through the encrypted channels of British press rooms and the quiet corridors of diplomatic offices. It was not a leak, nor was it a piece of gossip whispered by a courtier. It was a formal declaration, cold and precise, that would soon be recognized as the final death knell of the Sussex brand's association with the British Monarchy. The statement read that no private foundation established after a departure from royal duty is permitted to trade, either explicitly or implicitly, on the authority, symbolism, or privileges of the crown. It continued with a warning that, where confusion has been created, it must be corrected, and where advantage has been taken, explanations will be demanded. Within minutes, Buckingham Palace confirmed the wording, signaling that this was not a rogue comment but a coordinated institutional strike. Then came the second blow, delivered not through press theatrics or televised interviews, but through the devastating weight of documentation. Royal investigators, operating under a forensic review jointly authorized by Princess Anne and Prince William, had compiled a thick dossier examining Harry and Meghan's Archewell Foundation. They had scrutinized its finances, its branding, and, most controversially, the couple's recent international engagements. At the center of this storm was their January trip to Nigeria, a tour that had looked to the world like a royal visit, but was now being exposed as something far more complex and legally precarious. The narrative that had sustained Harry and Meghan for 6 years, that they were global humanitarians operating on a higher moral plane, was about to collide with the hard reality of a ledger that did not balance. To understand why the palace chose this moment to strike, one must look at the financial smoking gun that Princess Anne had placed at the center of her inquiry. Currently, Harry and Meghan's Archewell Foundation has been listed as non-compliant and barred from participating in registered activities such as fundraising or charitable grant-making. This was not a minor administrative error. It was a symptom of a much larger collapse. Anne cited data directly from the United States Internal Revenue Service, which painted a picture of an organization in freefall. In 2022, Archewell had seen an $11 million drop in donations compared to the previous year. By 2024, the situation had deteriorated further. The foundation faced unprecedented financial penalties while donations and grants sharply declined. The numbers told a story of extravagance masked as philanthropy. Expenses were reported at over $5 million, a sharp rise from the previous year, while total donations received had crashed to just over $2 million. This reflected a staggering 54% increase in costs at a time when revenue was drying up. But the statistic that truly enraged the royal auditors was the allocation of funds. Only a fraction of the budget, roughly $1.25 million, was allocated to actual charitable programs. The rest, millions upon millions, vanished into operational expenses, bloated salaries, and vague administrative costs. Salaries alone accounted for nearly $1 million, while other undefined expenses soared to nearly $3 million. The net revenue, which had been a healthy surplus in previous years, had turned into a deficit. The foundation was burning cash to keep the lights on, while the charitable impact was becoming a footnote in its own annual report. According to palace sources, Princess Anne had personally flagged the couple's visit to Nigeria as the tipping point. Nigerian officials had confirmed that Harry and Meghan entered the country under diplomatic-grade facilitation. They were granted special visa processing, expedited airport corridors, secured accommodation zones, and military-escorted transfers. To the cameras and the cheering crowds, it looked like a royal tour. It had all the pomp, the security, and the prestige of a state visit. Yet, at the exact moment they were being feted as global royalty, the charity attached to the tour, Archewell, had been listed by California regulators as restricted from fundraising due to an overdue renewal payment of merely $200. This technical lapse triggered a deeper regulatory scrutiny that the Sussexes could not afford. The contradiction was impossible to ignore, and for the royal aides in London, it was offensive. They asked privately how a foundation that was legally barred from financial operations could generate a trip with royal tier treatment, while its founders insisted they were acting independently of the crown. Princess Anne wanted that answered. So did Prince William. Palace lawyers quietly began the tedious work of cross-referencing royal compliance logs with public filings from regulators in California and Florida, states where Archewell's charitable status and financial disclosures had come under review. The overlap they found was uncomfortable. Internal royal memoranda reportedly matched several elements already visible in American regulatory data, including falling donation levels, rising operational costs, shrinking staff numbers, and restructuring notices sent to employees under the warning that the charity might close in its current form. Anne's inquiry did not concern whether Archewell had a right to exist as a private entity. It concerned whether Harry and Meghan had blurred the line between private philanthropy and royal representation after formally ceasing royal duties in 2020. In palace thinking, that distinction is sacred. It is the firewall that protects the neutrality and dignity of the crown. According to two senior officials briefed on the review, Anne demanded written clarification on exactly which Nigerian ministries had been contacted, who had requested the travel facilitation, whether royal titles were referenced in formal correspondence, and whether Archewell communications implied institutional royal backing. These were not branding issues, they were constitutional ones. If Harry and Meghan were using their titles to secure diplomatic favors for a private failing charity, they were trading on the king's reputation without his permission. Prince William's involvement in this crackdown was deliberate and restrained, marking a shift in his leadership style. As Prince of Wales, he oversees multiple crown-linked charitable portfolios, including environmental initiatives through Earthshot and homelessness programs under Homewards. Royal aides stressed that William's charities operate under strict governance structures with audited accounts, public trustees, board oversight, and defined hours of royal participation. He is known to log dozens of working days per year on a single initiative. The contrast mattered deeply to the investigation. Palace investigators reportedly noted that Harry and Meghan, though unpaid leaders of Archewell, had declared in filings that they spent an average of 1 hour per week on foundation business. Anne highlighted this figure, not to mock it, but to question whether such limited involvement justified international tours accompanied by ceremonial treatment traditionally reserved for sovereign representatives who dedicate their lives to service. In a follow-up briefing, one line was repeated across the corridors at Buckingham Palace: "The crown does not float on private ventures." Princess Anne, long regarded as the monarchy's strictest custodian of protocol, was said to be furious that public confusion persisted over whether Harry and Meghan still acted on Britain's behalf abroad. She instructed officials to draft formal letters demanding public clarification that Archewell is not crown-affiliated. She demanded full disclosure of how travel privileges were requested and confirmation that no royal insignia, language, or implication was used. She also demanded immediate correction of any promotional material suggesting royal endorsement. Failure to comply, sources said, would trigger escalated institutional distancing, possibly including legal restrictions on the use of titles and charitable branding. While the palace worked quietly behind closed doors, the public reaction moved faster than anyone anticipated. Polling commissioned by British newspapers in late January showed approval ratings for the Sussexes hovering near abysmal lows, while Princess Anne, rarely flashy but relentlessly disciplined, registered approval ratings that eclipsed almost everyone else in the family. Online commentary framed the dispute not as celebrity gossip, but as a clash of philosophies: tradition versus branding, stewardship versus self-promotion, service versus spectacle. In London, a retired civil servant summed it up in one widely shared quote, noting that Anne turns up in the rain and stays all afternoon, and that is what royal duty looks like. Palace sources stressed that Anne's move was not yet a prosecution, but a line in the sand. Royal investigators continued to compile data, coordinating with American regulatory findings. But the signal sent deliberately on January 29 was unmistakable. The monarchy believed its image had been placed in proximity to a private enterprise operating under regulatory scrutiny, and it wanted the separation made visible immediately. As questions mounted around Harry and Meghan's Nigeria visit, royal investigators began charting a more sobering path, one built not on headlines but on hard filings and fiscal footprints. What emerged from this review wasn't criminal in the legal sense, but in the eyes of palace tradition, it was something more dangerous, a misuse of moral currency. According to publicly available filings, the Archewell Foundation saw a drastic decline in donations and operations between 2021 and 2023. In 2021, Archewell reported receiving more than $13 million in donations. By 2022, that number had plummeted to under $500,000 with just a handful of new contributions recorded. The foundation continued to pay out some grants and salaries, but operating costs began to outpace income, triggering a shift toward what insiders described as cost control mode. One insider told the press that the walls were closing in and everything was being restructured or frozen. People were told not to expect renewals. These claims were backed by tax records showing staff layoffs quietly executed in early 2023. No new large-scale projects were announced in 2024. The foundation failed to file key paperwork on time in California, resulting in the temporary suspension of its ability to raise or distribute funds legally. It was this final lapse, a missed renewal fee, that triggered wider scrutiny both publicly and within the palace. To the royal institution, it was an unacceptable contrast. On the one hand, the Sussexes were touring as de facto royals, visiting orphanages, meeting national leaders, and conducting photo ops under the narrative of humanitarian outreach. On the other, their foundation, the very body supposedly anchoring these efforts, was not in compliance with basic regulatory requirements. And worse, they never clarified that to the public. While Archewell technically reactivated its California charity status weeks later, the damage was done. Royal officials reportedly attempted to obtain transparency documents voluntarily from Archewell's UK partners, but were met with legal roadblocks, delays, or non-responses. This lack of openness only deepened Anne's concern that Harry and Meghan were treating royal-style influence as a shield, not a standard. Princess Anne reportedly said in a private meeting that humanitarianism is not a costume you wear abroad. It is a ledger you must balance publicly and honorably. Her growing discomfort mirrored internal concerns that Archewell's engagements were being used to suggest legitimacy despite behind-the-scenes financial confusion. Prince William, while more cautious than Anne in tone, reached a quiet consensus that enough was enough. For years, the palace had walked a line, allowing Harry and Meghan to live privately while tolerating occasional media confusion over whether their activities had royal backing. But now, Archewell was more than a brand. It was a subject of investigation both by regulators in the United States and by the Crown's own internal compliance bodies. And while no criminal charges were in play, William believed the reputational cost to the monarchy was rising. If they are asking for donations, a senior royal advisor noted, then it matters whether people believe they are giving to something royal. If that belief is mistaken, then we are into misrepresentation. Thus, the quiet turned loud. What began as missed paperwork spiraled into something far deeper, a moment of reckoning between two visions of public service. The palace had drawn its line, and the next move belonged to Harry and Meghan. As internal investigations gained momentum, another front emerged, not in courtrooms or charity records, but in the court of public opinion. Meghan Markle, long adept at wielding media narratives, began a subtle yet unmistakable campaign to reframe the conversation. At the heart of it was a carefully curated blend of victimhood, legacy claims, and implied royal alignment, a combination that for a time confused donors, blurred affiliations, and threatened to destabilize the royal family's moral high ground. One of the key issues raised by both palace aides and external regulators was terminology. Marketing materials, online bios, and event invites repeatedly referred to Meghan and Harry as royal founders, Duke and Duchess. or senior British representatives without disclaimers that they no longer held active royal duties. At a Nigerian charity event in May 2025, one sponsor described the couple as global royals of the House of Windsor. Meghan reportedly gave a keynote address under a backdrop that included a stylized crown insignia. The language, though technically not illegal, was intentionally evocative. Princess Anne expressed alarm, noting that there are two kinds of confusion: accidental and engineered. She believed they were witnessing the latter. The palace commissioned a linguistic audit comparing Archewell's public communications with official royal protocols. The conclusion was damning. Over 60% of the materials used phrasing that could be reasonably interpreted by the public as official royal endorsements. That alone did not break laws, but it broke trust. Behind the scenes, royal staff began referring to Meghan's online presence as platforming the monarchy. According to an internal memo shared among senior royal communications officers, there was growing concern that Meghan's podcast relaunch featured segments on royal history with heavily editorialized takes. A planned documentary series was being pitched using behind-the-scenes Windsor footage from the couple's wedding and Frogmore Cottage days. Social media posts used hashtags implying royal impact and modern monarchy, despite their exit from royal duties in 2020. While Meghan's defenders argued that she was simply celebrating her heritage, Princess Anne disagreed. In an off-record quote relayed by a senior aide, Anne reportedly said that one doesn't celebrate the institution while actively rejecting its rules. That is marketing, not memory. Meanwhile, revelations emerged from former Archewell employees, both from US and UK-based teams. Several ex-staffers speaking anonymously to investigative outlets described internal tensions and blurred directives. One former staffer claimed they were told to pitch projects as impactful global royal work, but when they asked for guidelines on what that meant, there were none. Another described last-minute event, changes to make visits look more formal, or the inclusion of diplomatic-style protocols, such as flag displays or military escorts, some of which were arranged through partner organizations without full awareness of the royal exit implications. This gray zone allowed Meghan and Harry to walk a tightrope of credibility, never explicitly stating they represented the royal family, but never going out of their way to deny it either. Internally, Prince William began discussing the idea of legal clarification around the use of royal titles in fundraising. While it was politically sensitive to strip Harry and Meghan of their Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles entirely, the palace explored guidelines that would restrict those titles from being used in promotional or charitable materials without disclaimers. The goal wasn't revenge, it was protection. As one aide put it, the monarchy has rules because it has responsibilities. If those rules become optional, then everything the monarchy represents becomes optional too. These discussions remain private for now, but insiders say the Wales household, especially Catherine, supported the move quietly but firmly, seeing it as necessary to protect not only the institution, but the integrity of public trust. Amid the unfolding storm, British media outlets began publishing op-eds with a new tone, not scandal-hungry, but deeply weary. Columnists questioned how long the Sussexes could trade on royal proximity while rebuking the family itself. Even former supporters of Meghan voiced discomfort at what they saw as brand overreach. One widely shared quote in the Times read that you cannot both reject the crown and wear its jewels in the same sentence. The public isn't blind, and the damage is cumulative. In response, Buckingham Palace began a soft media campaign highlighting the quiet, consistent work of current royal representatives. Short-form documentaries were released about Anne's decades-long work with Save the Children, Princess Catherine's leadership in early childhood development, and Prince Edward's engagements across the Commonwealth. Each was a subtle but firm reminder of what true sustained service looks like. The turning point came on the morning of the 19th of January, 2026, when Princess Anne stepped before the press at St. James's Palace, flanked by legal counsel and the Royal Foundation's ethics chair. It was rare, almost unprecedented, for the Princess Royal to speak publicly about internal family matters. But this time, the silence had become untenable. with measured calm and unmistakable steel, Anne began by stating that it is the duty of the crown to serve, not to brand, to protect, not to exploit. She confirmed that the royal household had concluded a comprehensive investigation into the financial, ethical, and reputational implications surrounding the Archewell Foundation. She paused long enough for cameras to flash, then continued, stating that the investigation had found material overlap between funds raised under royal titles and their use in ventures not aligned with public service. The weight of her words reverberated through the room. It wasn't just a condemnation of poor accounting. It was a direct charge of misusing royal identity for personal influence. Anne added that several internal inconsistencies matched concerns raised independently by U.S. charitable compliance authorities, including undisclosed sponsorships, private jet usage billed under charitable initiatives, and a blurred distinction between Archewell Foundation and Archewell Productions. While she stopped short of naming Meghan or Harry outright, the implication was clear. She announced that they had sent formal communication requesting rectification, transparency, and the immediate cessation of any representation of royal endorsement, explicit or implied, unless pre-approved by the Sovereign Grant Office. Within 24 hours, Meghan Markle appeared via Zoom on a California-based women's leadership panel framed by golden sunlight and greenery. She did not directly address Anne's accusations, but her tone was unmistakably defensive. She stated that when women rise, there will always be noise, but they rise anyway. She described Archewell as a humanity-first movement and subtly positioned herself as a victim of outdated structures clinging to control. The audience applauded, but analysts noted the calculated omission. No mention of her royal titles, the Nigeria trip, or the funds in question. For many in the UK, this silence spoke louder than any rebuttal. Anne's statement had global ripple effects, particularly in Commonwealth nations where respect for the monarchy remains symbolically powerful. Leaders in Nigeria, Canada, and New Zealand issued cautious statements reaffirming their commitment to transparency in partnerships involving royal branding. A Nigerian cultural attaché told the press that while they welcomed the Sussexes in good faith, if that faith was exploited for marketing or influence, they deserved clarity. Back in Britain, public discourse shifted from scandal to standards. Commentators began asking who speaks for the monarchy and what responsible royal representation looks like. Princess Anne ended her address not with bitterness, but with quiet pride, stating that there are those who serve with cameras and those who serve with calloused hands, and the public knows the difference. The week following Princess Anne's searing statement was not one of retreat. It was a deliberate act of reform. On the 22nd of January, Prince William convened a special session of the Royal Foundation Council at Kensington Palace, issuing what is now being called the Transparency Charter. This comprehensive royal directive would reshape how the monarchy engages with public charitable work in the modern age. Designed to close loopholes exploited by figures like Meghan and Harry, the Transparency Charter outlines 5 core tenets. First, clarity of role. Any public representative of the Crown must now possess written authorization explicitly stating their official duties. Second, a financial audit trail. All funds collected under the banner of royal partnerships must be traceable to regulated accounts and reviewed by third-party auditors. Third, separation of brand and duty. Any royal initiative with media tie-ins must disclose its financial model. Fourth, host nation protections. International visits conducted under any royal title must include pre-visit compliance checks. And finally, digital accountability. All social media posts or websites that include royal symbols must be reviewed by the Crown Communications Office if they intend to represent public service work. William stood at a podium backed by the Royal Foundation's crest, declaring that service is not a slogan, but a standard. From that day forward, those who act in the name of the family must meet that standard with full transparency. Although he did not reference Harry or Meghan directly, insiders confirmed that a personal letter was dispatched to the couple within hours, formally demanding full financial disclosure of all Archewell Foundation activities since its inception and immediate suspension of any ongoing branding that implies a living royal endorsement. The palace gave them 14 days to comply. Just as swiftly, Meghan Markle's legal team issued a preemptive filing in California, citing public defamation and interference with charitable operations. Her attorneys argued that the royal family was engaging in strategic character destruction. While no lawsuit was officially filed, the document signaled intent. Meanwhile, Meghan launched a media counteroffensive, appearing on Oprah's Women in Leadership Summit. Draped in neutral beige, her tone was composed, but her words sharp. She avoided mention of Nigeria or the audit, focusing instead on emotional language and shifting the focus from evidence to identity. However, if Meghan's appeal was emotional, William and Catherine's strategy was institutional. The Princess of Wales quietly visited 3 grassroots charities the week of the charter's release, offering no speech or press photos, just the symbolism of quiet service. Royal commentators noted how the couple's public persona had evolved into less glitz and more gravitas. Back in Abuja, the Nigerian Foreign Ministry released a statement confirming that Meghan and Harry's May 2025 visit was not coordinated through formal diplomatic channels and lacked necessary clearance for using royal titles in official capacities. This was deeply embarrassing for the Sussexes and damaging to their brand. A poll taken shortly after revealed a dramatic shift in public opinion, with the vast majority of UK respondents believing Meghan and Harry should no longer use any royal titles. Whether or not Meghan and Harry respond formally to the 14-day demand remains to be seen, but the tone has been set. The crown is no longer passive. It is proactive, procedural, and publicly prepared to sever ties when necessary. As the 14-day deadline quietly expired with no response from Harry or Meghan, the royal family responded with action. The official royal website published a single-line update under the Public Duties section. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are no longer authorized to engage in any activities under royal title or branding in domestic or international settings. The palace had effectively pulled the final thread, revoking all symbolic license for Harry and Meghan to appear as working members of the monarchy. The decision was backed unanimously by the senior royals. Harry, now stripped of all formal privileges, faced a new reality where he was no longer shielded by royal ambiguity. Meghan lost the last tether connecting her brand to the crown. Netflix quietly paused pre-production of her upcoming series pending legal clarification. As the Sussexes' final thread was cut, Princess Catherine appeared in public for a brief symbolic engagement at a children's hospice, wearing no crown or designer statement, just a simple silver pendant. In the press gallery, not one question was asked about Meghan. They knew what this moment meant. The monarchy had moved on. For years, Harry and Meghan had operated in a space between royal privilege and independence, leveraging ambiguity. That space no longer exists. They are now officially and symbolically outsiders. And in their absence, the institution has begun to rebuild on terms of transparency, service, and restraint. The final act was not a courtroom or a press conference. It was a quiet deletion from a website, from duty, and from legacy. That silence spoke louder than any scandal. It was not just the end of an era, it was the start of a clean page.